Alright, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're going to be starting now, just because we don't have time. I'll just give 1 minute, and inshallah we're going to be continuing the Decoding Arabic class. It's been a while, but hopefully we can get some things refreshed, and hopefully we can continue because we are getting close to finishing the packet. I'm really excited. And we're going to be starting really soon to start asking you to do some translation, inshallah. So we're just going to be hopefully taking today 3 or 4 boxes. So inshallah, stay tuned and we'll try to try to kind of see what patterns you can find, at least from the screen that you have in front of you. See if you can find some patterns, if you can remember some of the things that we took before. This packet is available for free. You can just simply put what it says right here, 80% Quranic Arabic words, and you will find it as a PDF. Maybe you can add the word PDF. That way won't give you, or Google won't give you other websites and stuff. So it would be good to actually consider that. We do have a number of things that we're going to be saying today, and inshallah we'll be starting in just a couple of seconds. Okay, for those that are wondering about boxes 7, 8, and 9 and 10, I will see if I put those up. I will see them, inshallah. I will look into that, inshallah. All right, so here we are. We're going to start right now, inshallah. So we did talk about the previous boxes, and we said that those words are the regular verbs. Now, the regular verbs are pretty much very straightforward, not much to it. And we said that the root of a verb in Arabic is simply going to be the past tense, and it's going to be normally, and you could say almost 90% of the time, they're going to be a 3-lettered word, and it's going to be in the past tense. So we talked about how we would make the past tense into a present or a future tense by adding the ya, and sometimes it's going to be the 3rd letter having a dhamma, u, or it's going to be having an I, the kasra. And we mentioned that, and we said, sometimes it could even have that fatha and the 2nd letter. So I've got some patterns here. We did talk about these patterns before, so we're not gonna go over it again, but this is just a reminder of how some of those patterns for a regular verb will have some little modification, little changes in order to make it from a past tense and the root of a verb to the present and future tense by making some slight changes. The other part, which is the imperative verb, how you can make a verb that is from a past tense to an imperative form in where you're adding an u, and therefore having a sukoon on the 2nd letter and putting a dhamma, usjud, ush'ur, usduq, etc. Or sometimes there could be another form which gives you the same exact connotation, that it's an imperative, but it might have some slight modifications in where you're actually giving it a kasra instead of a dhamma, just as in here. So instead, let me just annotate, maybe that will help in emphasizing what we're talking about. So you could see right here, we said some slight changes, although they're going to give the same kind of imperative, but this one is in the pattern and the rhythm of if'il, versus this one is usjud or uf'ul. They're just going to give the same connotation, which is an imperative for that verb, and just keep that in mind, that you can have different rhythms or different patterns, but giving the same connotation, which is an imperative. Now, as for the easiest one, which is the subject, meaning the person that is doing the verb, that is performing the verb, it is in a pattern and in the rhythm of fa'il, فاعل. So ساجد, حامل, ظالم, فاسق, قاتل. Now you could see the pattern in where it sounds fa'il. In where it sounds, all you need to do is simply to the root of the verb add an a onto the first letter. In other words, add after it, and then make the third letter then have a kasra, and then you will get the subject, meaning the person that's actually doing that particular action. As for what we called al-masdar, which is, I think we said that was the noun of the verb. As funny as it sounds, in English there's no such thing as a noun of a verb, but there's an adjective and there's an adverb. But we said that there are different forms, and each one is going to have a different meaning. And we also said that the easiest way to remember these is basically, as you see it and kind of get the hang of it little by little until you become an expert on these words. There are a lot of things in the language that sometimes are not as easy as, well, here's the rule and just apply. Because remember, the rules came after the language, not the rules coming before the language. Meaning, it's not that people had put some rules for grammar and said, okay, well, here are the rules, let's make a language based on those rules. That's not how things happened. It's that people, subhanAllah, they start communicating using different sounds, and then these different sounds, they would have some kind of a pattern to them. And later, in order to make language easier and in order to figure out those patterns, that's when the grammar, or the idea of grammar, which is pretty much the theoretical side of trying to figure out how the patterns for those sounds were done, decades or maybe centuries or maybe many years before that. Now, you could we're going to see right now the different kind of a regular verb, in where we're going to now see an irregular type. But first, we're just going to go over box 19. That way we can get an idea and kind of refresh our minds on what we were saying before. So here we go on 19. On 19, we said that there is fa'ila. So this is another type of a past tense and a root. Remember, in Arabic, the root is normally, and 90% of the time, is a 3-lettered word. All right, and there are different formats, but in general, it's a 3-lettered root. And from that 3-lettered root, they would then add certain additions, and those certain additions are going to give a certain pattern, are going to give a certain meaning, etc. So all you need to do is just memorize these additions and memorize these patterns and these rhythms, and you will get there. So fa'ila, another form of a past tense, in where the first letter has a fatha, the second letter has a kasra, and the third letter has a fatha again. Fa'ila. Let's use a word that's easier to remember. Sami'a, which means heard. Now, for the pattern fa'ila, there's going to be the present tense. So that's the past tense. Now let's go for the present and the future tense. The present and future tense, what you're going to do is you're going to add to this original verb, you're going to add a ya onto it. So let's use probably a different color so you could see that emphasis on it. So we're going to make it into a yellow. Okay, so we're adding a ya onto it, and we're putting a sukoon on the top, and we're making this kasra become the fatha, and then it becomes yaf'alu. Now you could see how you're going to do these little modifications in order to get a present or a future tense. Now, as for the imperative for a word that has the root or the past tense with the root fa'ila, it's going to be if'al. If'al, in where that's the pattern. So let's see how it goes with isma' or sami'a. All you're adding is an I right there. You're making the second letter with a sukoon, and you're making this kasra go up and become a fatha on the top, and it becomes isma. Isma means hear. So you're now giving an order. This is an imperative to give an order. And as for the third, which is the subject, which is the person that is performing this verb, at least that particular one that we're talking about, fa'il سامع, meaning the person that's hearing. سامع, the person that's hearing, and therefore you're just adding those two modifications. You're adding on to the beginning of that, which is called the fa of the verb. And remember, we said the fa of the verb to mean the beginning, the first letter. And the ayn of a verb means the second letter. And the lam of a verb means the third letter. Remember, let's do it again. So the fa of the verb is the first letter. Just take it into this patterning in where the fa, maybe I could make this a little bit bigger. That way you guys can see it. Here we go. So when we look at that, we can actually see that the fa of the verb would be the first letter, and the ayn of the verb would be the second letter, and the lam of the verb would be the third letter. Now you have an idea when in Arabic grammar books, or specifically it's called sarf, which means the conjugation of the verbs and words and how those words are formed from the original root. And that's what distinguishes the Arabic language from other languages. It's that there's the part where there's a root, and from that root there's a certain pattern that you can grow. And every single addition, be it a haraka, fatha, dhamma, kasra, or be it a letter, a, u, e, etc., that is going to add a new meaning to it. And that's why they would say الزيادة في المباني زيادة في المعاني. So let me write that down. الزيادة في المباني زيادة في المعاني, which means that every addition onto the original root is, or the original the makeup in the beginning of a word, every single addition is going to add a new meaning. And words are supposed to be for meanings. And that's why in Arabic, if you just learn that sarf and you learn those additions, you're just going to go rolling and move on with understanding more and more words. Fi'l, and that's basically going to be the noun of the verb. The noun of the verb that comes with the root fa'il. So fi'l, but you could see here we did give some ideas, and we said that the root and the masdar, which is the noun of the verb, may have different forms, and we did give that before. I believe I shared it before, and we said it could be in fi'ala, it can be in fu'l, it can be in fa'al, it can be in fi'l, it can be in, we said the easiest way to remember them is really by memorizing them and just understanding that the masdar actually comes in different formats. So right here, I know you're like, well, wait a minute, how come I don't see the word fi'l right here in the column? Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust the zoom right there. There we go. In the column in the same words right here. So the reason why is because it's a little bit more complex, but those are the most common words. At least memorize those masadar, memorize those noun of the verbs, if you may. And you're going to remember that sami'a, samma'a would be the microphone, speakers, probably, something that you're hearing from. And huzn, so right here, hazina would mean they were saddened. Right, so would mean that they were saddened, and that would be the root. And from here, the past tense would be yahzanu, meaning that they are sad in a present tense or a future tense. Yahzanu, you're adding the ya, and you're putting a sukoon, and you're making the third letter, which is the ayn of the verb, making it with a fatha. Yahzanu. Future tense, present tense, that they are sad. Now, one thing is that ihzan, I know that somebody's asking and wondering, well, what about that hadith where it says, oh Allah, we seek refuge in you from al-gham and al-hazan. Al-hazan is different than huzn. Huzn, this is the verb. Al-hazan is basically the hill. That's a different form, because that's a masdar right there. So here we go. Yahzanu, to be sad. All right. Ihzan, you're telling him you gotta be sad. Hazin, it's actually supposed to be hazin. All right. So hazin, at least in this form, there's no such word as hazin, but in this form, hazin, it's actually hazin. Hazin is the person that's sad. All right, but here they just wanted to go with the format. I don't know if there's such a word as hazin, but huzn, meaning the sadness itself, the sorrow, sadness or sorrow. Now let's go for the third word, hasiba. Now with the word hasiba here, they put you to think and to consider. And that is actually right, because hasiba can mean where you evaluated something and you thought that it was such and such. So that would be hasiba. You evaluated, you thought of something, and that the conclusion that you got to was such and such. So though that was hasiba. And that's how it became to consider. Yahsabu, also to think, or it can also mean to doubt, and it can also mean, so yahsabu or yahsibuhu dham'anu ma'a, meaning that they would think, they would be in doubt, they're not really sure, but they would think, they would just guess, a wild guess, but they would not necessarily have a complete and an absolute idea. They're just wondering. You've got some idea that is probably what it is, but not absolute consideration. Ihsib, now this one is the imperative form, in where you're telling the person, well, you gotta think, or you gotta evaluate. You have to estimate. So ihsib, you're giving the person an imperative, evaluate, consider, etc. Hasib, it's basically the person that's performing the verb, and in this situation, hasib, meaning the person himself that is actually considering or evaluating, etc. The word muhasib is actually an accountant, but that's taken from the root hasiba, right? The word muhasib, let me write that down, which is an accountant, okay? Which is an accountant, muhasib. You could see that you got the root hasiba, and then they added the mu, and then added the a to make the fa'al for that, to make the subject for that, and then the kasra, muhasib, right? Hasb is more like enough, sustain. So here, and you're wondering, well, how did it actually get that from the meaning hasiba? But hasb, you're ending the evaluation. Hasb. So when somebody's rating and we tell them hasbuk, means stop. That's enough. All right. So you're ending that type of consideration, and you're bringing an end to that evaluation, and you're saying hasb. All right, now let's move on, and we're gonna go hafidha. Hafidha would actually be to guard or to protect, but remember, this is still a regular verb. Yahfadhu, again, right there, based on that pattern. Yahfadhu, to protect or guard. To protect or guard, but it's going to be, this is guarded or protected, and this one is present and future tense, meaning guarding or protecting. Guarding or protecting. And then we go for ihfadh. So ihfadh ihfad, then you're giving an order and saying, hey, I want you to guard or protect. Now you're giving an order, guard or protect. And the person definitely must consider what you are asking them to do. And let's move on. And hafiz, the guarder or protector. Hafiz. Now we've got that form in where reminds us of the word fa'il, hafiz. And here, the guarder or protector. Now, one thing is that, many times I might use some words that are not grammatically correct in English, but it sounds, I'm trying to give that, or maybe applying kind of like the African American accent, which is at many times actually based on the African languages that the African slaves brought with them. So they started applying the rules of the African language on the new language which they were learning, which is the English. And I guess I'm doing the same thing right here. So just putting the Arabic grammar on English and putting it there. Hifz would be that noun for the verb hifz, and would mean the act of protection. So hifz, where you're saving something, and yeah, hifz is saving. Yeah, so all right, khasira, let's go for khasira and yakhsaru. May you not lose anything but sins. Khasira means to lose. And when you're losing something, it's usually supposed to be something valuable. And that's why it would be called khusran. Because it's valuable and you're losing it, then that means you are you're missing out on something. Yakhsaru would mean that they are losing. And this is a past and future tense. Ikhsar, you're telling him lose. Make sure you don't tell anybody that. Khasir is basically the person that is a loser. Khusr is basically loss. So now we're talking about loss. Now we're talking about that noun of the verb khasira, which means lost. Let's do it again. Khasira, lost, and yakhsaru, losing, or losing, or is losing. And ikhsar, you're telling him lose. Khasir, you're basically describing the person that is the loser. And khusr is basically the loss itself. The loss itself. Rahima, look at the word rahima. It actually came, even though I think it actually is more. Wonder if we would just go over it really quick. I'm sure it appeared more than 148 times, because just the word ar-Rahman ar-Rahim actually comes from the root. Yeah, I was right. So I just looked it up really quick. The word rahima, the occurrences it occurred in is 339 times. The reason why is because, remember, the word Rahman and Rahim actually come from this root. So if Rahman and Rahim appeared just in the word Bismillah Rahman Rahim 114 times, well, for sure it's going to be more than that. But, and that's why I said don't always trust these numbers. And I just looked it up really quick on my tab on my phone right here, and it said 339 times is the number of occurrences. So Rahima would mean to be, was merciful, because Rahima is in the past tense. Was merciful. Yarhamu, being merciful. So they're right now past and future tense. And you're telling the person, irham, well, be merciful. You're giving him an order, an imperative right there. Rahim would be the person that is merciful. You might say, well, what about Rahman and Rahim? I thought it was supposed to be the person that's merciful. So that would be more of a masdar, the noun of a verb. And that's why, the person is Rahim, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahman Rahim, meaning that there is no one that can be at least in Rahman. There's no one that can be Rahman, because that is a very specific term, and this is a very special derivative from the word Rahima. It's a special derivative. There's absolutely no way that you can call any human being or anybody Rahman, because it's a very specific derivative from the word Rahima to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you may call somebody Rahim. All right, you may call somebody Rahim, meaning that they are merciful, but not the word Rahman. Sorry. Rahim would mean the person that is merciful, that is affectionate. Affectionate, that's why the hadith actually says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is Ar-Rahman, and He created Ar-Rahim. Now the Rahim is basically the uterus. The uterus that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, the uterus, which is a metaphor for the most merciful, the most affectionate, something that encompasses a person's life, a person's growth and development, and etc. And that is the uterus. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one that had created the uterus, but the word uterus in Arabic is rahim, and it actually comes from the root rahima. Comes from this root, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually, in English you can't actually see it, the word uterus, it's just one word, but in Arabic there's a derivative that it comes from, in where you're deriving it from this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hadith, and this is a hadith Qudsi, and that's why we said hadith. In the hadith Qudsi, He actually said that it is derived from the rahim, the rahima. It is derived from the root mercy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mercy. And then in the end, the theme for this whole hadith is basically so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, whoever would reach, in other words overlook, would support the rahim, which are women relatives, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would support him and give him rizq. If they stay away from the rahim, that is the women relatives, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will boycott them, in other words ostracize them from getting the best of His blessings. Alright, now here we go for rahmah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us and you the mercy and the rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that would be, now look at right here. Remember all those masadar, all those noun of the verbs, we said that they're not really going to follow the specific pattern that is on the top. But despite that, I believe I had given before the different forms of masadar, so we'll give it out later inshallah. Alright, now let's go ahead for shahida. Shahida means that they witnessed. So this is the past of the verb. Shahida would be that they witnessed. And here it says 66 occurrences, but guess what? Just looked it up on my phone. It actually said the number of occurrences is 160 times. It's 160 times that root shahida occurred in the Quran. Shahida. So witnessed, and then we go yashhadu, witnessing, because it's a past, it's a future tense. It's a future tense, so yashhadu, witnessing, whether it's in the present or in the future. Okay, whether it's in the present or future. Now the imperative form of it is ishhad. You gotta witness. Now you're asking him, giving him an order that they must be there to witness. Shahid is basically the person, the witness. In English it's just the witness and not the witnesser. That's wrong English. But the witness himself or herself. Alright? And shuhud are basically the witnesses, those that are witnessing. Okay? The shuhud, the witnesses in general. Alright? Now, and by the way, it's important to mention that shahida could also mean to be present. So when I say that somebody is, shahida waqa'at kada, if they were shahida waqat kada, that they were witnesses on such and such battle, for example. It doesn't mean that witnesses for a court or a trial case, but here it would mean that they were present during that event. So just keep that in mind, because you may have different usages that you will find in the Quran. Alima, the root knew. So knew to mean new, to be aware, have knowledge of something. So not new to mean brand new, to mean never used, but new to mean from this word, which is to have knowledge of. Alima, knew. Ya'lamu, know, meaning the person is knowing, or to know, meaning future and present tense. I'lam, now you're telling him you gotta know. Okay, i'lam, keep in mind, know, be aware. All right, so i'lam, and when you actually say i'lam, that means you're many times giving i'lam, you're giving a warning of something. When you're telling something, keep in mind or know, it's not that you're asking him to get an education, but you're actually giving him a form of a warning form. Alim, meaning the person that knows too much, which is the scholar. Okay, so the person that knows too much, or the scholar. Alim, the scholar, because they contain knowledge, so therefore they're scholars. See, look at the difference. Like in Arabic, alim would be from the root alima, but in English, know and scholar, they have nothing in pattern. There's no derivative whatsoever. Look at the Arabic and how it grows in those words. It's beautiful. I find it really amazing. There's actually, I forgot what his name was, but he was a Japanese scholar. He never became Muslim, by the way. I forgot what his name was. I went to his books, and he wrote over 40 books in Arabic grammar. He's a Japanese scholar and wrote a lot of books on Islam, and even the root for the way that Arabic language actually is derived. Believe it or not, but this guy even memorized the Mu'allaqat. He wrote so many books on not Islamic, but on Arabic language, and he was always focusing and emphasizing on how the roots grow. I'm sorry I forgot his name. Maybe I can pick up his name later, inshallah. But he is actually a scholar, and he was so fascinated with how the Arabic language actually grows, and later became a professor specialized in Arabic sarf, to be specific, which is the conjugation and how to conjugate the verbs in the words. And he claimed that there's no other language that has that. At least Semitic languages all have that, but other languages don't. Amila, meaning to do. Oh, amila, done. So because it's in the past. Amila, done. Ya'malu, so doing. Ya'malu, the doing. They're performing something, doing something. I'mal, now you're giving an order. Do it. I'mal, do. Amil is basically the person that's doing something. And many times the word amil can, in some languages, or what I mean by languages is basically dialects. The amil could be the person that works in construction, but that's not necessarily the case. The amil can be any person that's doing anything. So amilun, for example, would be doing it. We're performing. We're actively working on something. So the amil would be actively working on something, and that's why, in some dialects, the amil is because they're actively working on something. They would consider it as for the construction workers. Amil. Amal. Now we're going to the noun of the verb amal, which would be the activity. All right, the activity. So whatever activity could be, it could be magic, because many times people would use the word amal, just an activity, to refer to magic. And the reason for that is that Arab, they would abstain from using things that they fear of, and sometimes they would use a word that they would fear and give it an opposite and they would use a word that is opposite of what it means. So for example, the word amal, they fear magic, so they won't even say the word magic, and they will instead just say, well, this person, there was something that was done to him, without really saying the word magic because they fear it. Same thing, for example, cancer. They won't even say cancer. They would prefer saying, that disease. We don't even want to mention the name. All right? They will just say that disease. Or sometimes even a word, the opposite of what it is. So for somebody that is somebody that was bit by a snake, for example, they'll actually say, they're Salim, that, oh, he's fine, even though he just got bit by a snake. But they use the word Salim, which actually comes from the root Salima, which means that they are cured, they're safe, they're fine. But they would use the word Salim because they're very optimistic that there's hope that he might actually get cured from it, and he might be saved from the poison that this snake had done to him. Same thing with mafaza, that getting lost in the desert. It's supposed to be getting lost in the desert. You're supposed to lose hope, but they will call it mafaza, meaning it's the success. You're going to, there's hope for you to get to a safe land and be out of that that dangerous area. Same thing in some cultures, they will call fire, or afia, they will call it afia because they fear fire, but the word afia is supposed to mean health, but they will use afia for fire to mean that there's hope, that even if you are burnt, that you're going to get cured. So it's really strange, but I guess it's a different way of looking at the world around you by giving it the opposite meaning. Kariha means hated, and right now in English, in our postmodern culture, the word kariha is a word that you're not supposed to be using. But in Islam, no, there are certain things that you have to hate there, just as there are certain things that you have to like. Yakrahu, hating. So yakrahu is hating, or to hate. Well, yeah, yakrahu, to hate, hating. So past and present. Ikrah, hate. You're asking him to hate. You're forcing him to hate. You're telling him that he has to hate, or she has to hate. Kareh, the person that's hating. They're eating or they're drinking their medication, wahuwa kareh, while they're really disliking it. They just can't even swallow it. They're totally disliking it. That's kareh. They don't like it. They totally it's totally, what is the word that they use in English there? It's totally abhorred, there's the word, to that nafs, and you just totally don't like it. And that's why, like in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ, that al-qital, which is fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, jihad, battle, etc., that it was prescribed onto you, even though it is detestful to you, meaning you don't like it, but you still have to do it. And that's why, for many women, they're always saying, I'm not sure polygamy is something that I would want for myself, etc. And I would say, it can be something that you don't like, but there's a difference between, I know that this is the ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I would not want such a thing to happen to me. That's absolutely part of our nature. You have not gotten out of the fold of Islam by saying that. Yes, you may not like it, but you submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying, I know it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered halal, considered permissible, so I don't want it to happen to me, but I will not go against the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and consider it that, no, this is anti-women, this is anti-women's rights, this is bringing in injustices and etc., because that would be going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sharia, and therefore kufr. But let's see for kur. Kur is hate. Kur is hate itself. So hate itself. And hate, kur, in Islam, you love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright, so kur. And basura. Basura. Basura would mean to watch or to see. Now, that's why basurtu bima lam yabsuru. I saw what they did not see, as in the ayah. Alright, bima lam yabsuru bi. Basura, to see, to overlook, to observe. Here's a word. Basura, observe. Yabsuru, yabsuru, observing. So the person is yabsuru, the person is observing or seeing. So this is a future tense and a present tense. They're seeing, they're observing, they're watching. Ubsur, now you're telling him, well, yeah, I want you to observe, I want you to look, I want you to see. And basir, the person himself is seeing and observing, etc. Basar, now that's the noun, the verb, sight. So of course, or observation. Here's another word. So look at, in English, observation comes from the verb observe. And in Arabic, basar. Basar. That all comes from the root basura. Alright, so observation, sight. It can insight is more so insight, tabsira, maybe? Basira. There you go. Insight is basira. Yeah, good thing I remembered that. Subhanallah, you know. Basira would be insight. And the insight, basira, basira. So the person can be blind but have basira. So what is the difference between basar and basira? So basar is more related to the actual, eye gland, but basira is a deeper type of seeing, in where you're not seeing the surface of it, but you're deep insight. You've got insight. You could see from your heart. That's why it's called basira. And when you look at basira, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all basira. It's such a beautiful word, in where it is telling you gotta look farther than just the surface of things, and you gotta have deep insight. Beautiful. So basar is sight, but basira is insight, even though it's not mentioned here. And I've mentioned before that there are many different masadar, or different noun of the verbs, that are not mentioned, but it would be good to at least have some of those words there, because it will help you by far. It will help you a lot in getting there. All right, now we go for the irregular verbs. The irregular verbs are tricky, not even just for you, but trust me, they're even tricky on an Arabic speaker, because they're irregular and they are pretty much those random words. So don't get lost. Let me see how many of those irregular verbs. Now, irregular verbs, they're basically meaning that they would have either a shadda, which is called tad'if or muda'af. All right, they would have either a shadda. All right, let me use that here. They would have either a shadda, or they would have, remember, a, u, e, and those are the vowels. They can have the vowel in the beginning of a word, or middle of a word, end of a word, and that would right away, and we're talking about the root here, and that would mean that they're irregular verbs, and they can even have more than one vowel, and that's why they would be called irregular verbs. And those irregular verbs would have their own rule. They would have their own rule. Don't get lost, don't get confused on that. It's okay if you don't fully understand it, because I'll promise you, even an average Arabic graduate, and I mean by graduate, would at many times get confused and get lost in these irregular verbs. So don't get lost. At least memorize these verbs. Let's see. So here I'm just gonna at least give you at least give you these words and what they mean. So those box 19 would be the end of the regular verbs. Box 20 is mudaf or mudaf, which basically are the verbs with the root having a shadda. Now mithal would be the verbs that start. So mithal right there would be the verbs that are irregular, and to be more specific, the ones that start with a vowel. Ajwaf would be the words that are irregular verbs. So this is ajwaf. Mithal would mean the beginning of a word, the beginning of the root of a word starts with a vowel, the beginning. And ajwaf would mean the root of that verb, the middle of it would have a vowel. You could see here, dhaqa. Look at all those words. The ayn of the verb, which is ie, which is the second letter, would have a vowel. And in this specific case, they put you the a, but it doesn't have to be only an a. Let's see the other types of irregular verbs. And here, naqis. Naqis would mean that that particular irregular root of the verb would have the last letter of it have a vowel. All right, so you could see here radiya, khashiya, hadiya, or hada, actually not hadiya, sorry. And mahmuz, from the root of it, you could see hamza would mean that there would be an hamza, probably in the beginning, probably in the middle, probably at the end. But they would have their set of rules. But like I said, even if you don't necessarily get the grammar of it, at least memorize those words that you have here, and that will get you inshallah to a certain level of knowing how to do this. And here's fa'ala, another type of an irregular form in where it is the middle having the tad'if, which is the shadda. So just a note, you've got several of those irregular verbs. Even if you don't understand or you get confused on how the conjugation happens, at least memorize the words and memorize those different formats. That will help you a lot in getting the hang of it, and inshallah it will help you even when we do the actual translation and decoding for the Quran. You will have the most important words already memorized and in place and handy. So don't get confused. You got 10 minutes left, but I will be happy to answer questions before I give just an overview about what we're doing here. So if there's anybody that has any questions, you could raise your hands. I believe there is this little part where you could raise your hand and actually let us know that you would like to ask a question, or if you don't want to go on the mic, which is totally understandable, you can just type in the question. All right, so let's go on with box 20, since I don't see any questions, and we're going to explain that part of it. Remember, these are irregular verbs, so don't get confused on it. And the irregular verb, we're going to start with the irregular type, which is called al-muda'af or tad'if. And what that means, the muda'af or tad'if, in English it means multiplication. We don't mean multiplication meaning the math of it, but multiplied, meaning that it is adding up, being accumulated. So that is what tad'if initially means. But the shadda, just a general rule, this is not in detail. When you have a shadda, which is this upside down 3, on a word, it can mean that something gradual is happening. It can also mean that you're penetrating something gradually. You're maybe, you're going into mourning, you're going into a city, etc. You're going inside something, all right? And it can also mean to change. Now look at that. You got different things. So it can mean gradual change. So a gradual change. It can also mean excessive, the excessive use of something. So excessively doing something, excessively drinking something, excessively getting involved in something. All right, that would mean that excessive part, which many times in Arabic they will say mubalagha, which would mean that there is somewhat of an exaggeration, but not quite an exaggeration. It's more of an excessiveness of something. All right, and it can also mean that the frequency. So frequency, which is repetition. This is happening too many times. The frequency. So there's the repetitive part of it. All right. So it's really important. The repetitive. It's really important to at least memorize and get the hang of understanding that when you have a shadda on a verb, you're either going to think of something going in something, you're going to talk, or probably changing, evolving into something. There's an excessive side to it. There is a frequency, there's a repetition. So those are the most important things. There are other meanings, but at least keep those in mind. Those are the most common. Well, let's see when we use that part in where we're talking about a root that is actually, it sounds really easy, doesn't it? Okay, well, let's see how easy it is. Well, this root is actually 2 words, or is it? Well, here's one little secret. When you have a shadda, the shadda is actually the letter multiplied by 2. So it's a letter with a sukoon and another, the same exact letter, having a fatha, dhamma, kasra, whatever. All right? So that would make that letter, it's not necessarily 2 letters, it's actually 3. But the third, or the letter that has a shadda, they basically accumulated them together. They basically inserted them together and made it one shadda. Instead of saying falala, so they'll just say falla. Instead of saying hayaya or hayya, they will just put it together, hayya. Instead of saying radada or raddada, radda. Make it easy and more fluent to say. Sadda. Sadda. In other words, it's basically that letter with a sukoon, sadda. Just say it together, sadda. And darra, darra. Dalla, dalla. Dhanna, dhanna. Adda, adda. Gharra, madda, massa, wadda. All right, now we go into how do we make the present part of that. The way we make the present part of that is really simple. What you're going to do is, you could see you've got a number of different patterns in where you're adding the ya and you're putting either a kasra or a dhamma. But it's not an issue for you to choose. It's the pattern that in Arabic it is. All right, so hayya, yahya. So what are we doing in this particular verb? Simply because, you know, they shouldn't have actually put the word hayya here, because this actually has the last letter having a vowel, so I would have omitted that, but I'm going to read it despite. All right, hayya is one of the most complex ones, so, you know, let's just read it and that's it. Hayya would mean brought back to life. Yahya, yahya, meaning, well, actually this brought back to life, and this is bringing to life. Ihya, bring it to life. Hayya, hayya, well, it's actually, this one's there's a little mistake in it, because that would be hay. Hay, there you go. Hay would be the person that is live. All right, hay would be the person that's live. Haya would be life, the noun of that verb. Now let's go for radda, radda, and here to give back, to return. All right, to give back, to return, but radda in the past tense, returned, returned, and returning, or returning meaning present tense, and urdud, you're telling him return it. All right, urdud. Rad, rad, the one that is bringing back. bringing back and restoring. That's a more accurate verb. Restoring. So radda would more be to restore, because you're taking it back to its initial format. It is in its initial way. So radda would more, you return it and or to restore. Rad is the restoration itself. All right, restoration itself. Sadda to hinder or to turn away, and many times sadda can also mean to put a block to something. So you're blocking something, there's a barrier, right? Sadda, put a barrier. So they put a barrier, that was in the past tense. They turned away. Yasuddu, to block something. They're blocking something. Yasuddu, they're rejecting, they're making an obstacle to prevent something. All right, yasuddu. Usdud, you're telling him, you gotta prevent it, you gotta stop it. And sad, the person himself that's blocking things. He's the person that's blocking this. All right, sad is basically the blockage. Okay, so sad, the blockage. Sad, it can be different ways. It can be a blockage, it can be a concrete blockage, it can be a metaphorical blockage where you're just rejecting, you're not refusing, you're not taking in, and there you're getting into that is a blockage, and not necessarily an actual physical blockage, but a metaphorical one in where it's acting as that wall that's not letting anything go through. Darra, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep any harm away from us. Darra would mean harm, okay, or harmed, to be more accurate. Harmed, oh sorry, it's this one. Harmed, and yadurru, harming, and udrur, harm. Now the word harm is as evil as it sounds. It has nothing to do with being good. Okay, so make sure you don't tell somebody to or order them to harm someone. Dar, meaning that it's harmful. Harmful? Well, if it's the person, well, anyways, you can't have a person actually dar, or can you? Yeah, you can, if those people are harmful. Yeah. Darra, or darar, actually, darar can be a more accurate, masdar for that, because darar would mean harm, just the actual harm. Okay. Dalla, we're almost done right here. We're just gonna finish those boxes, or at least that box. Dalla. Now dalla could mean to go in a delusion. So dalla, they went in a delusion, and that delusion is more in their ideas, in their perspectives, but dalal can also be transferred and referring to a person's behavior. So any type of dalal, it would start out with a wrong perception, and then it will be transformed in an actual behavior that is deterred away from truth. So that's what the word dalal actually means. The word dalal, it is first speaking and referring to the perspective gone wrong, and then the actual behavior gone wrong in accordance with that. Yadillu, meaning they're going astray, they're going wrong, with keeping in mind all the stuff that I had said about perspective and all that. Idlil, you're ordering them to actually go wrong. Dal is the person that has gone astray, the person himself that has gone astray or had the wrong perspective, had the wrong interpretation, and then they had gone off with their behavior. Dalala, that would be the part where it's the masdar, meaning the noun of the verb of that. Dalala would mean the delusion. So dalala, delusion, or the misunderstanding that happened. Dhanna, now I want to, the word dhanna here, this is really important because many times in the Quran you can have the word dhanna have different meanings. So the word dhanna can mean to think or to believe. And it's really important that they actually put to think or to believe, because the word dhanna, so dhanna, if it's referring to a believer, then it's going to mean an actual strong faith. But if it's inna ba'd al-dhanni ithm, for example, if it's referring to a non-believer, it's actually going to speak about speculation. It's going to speak about a thought in where there's more doubt in it than absolute or anything based on anything absolute. So that's why we'll look at more of a speculation. Speculation would mean that you're not really sure of something, perhaps you're in doubt. But when it refers to the mu'mineen, no, it's actually talking about a firm thinking, firm belief. What does that mean? And let's clarify it really quick. So when you see in the Quran that the believers in Surah Al-Haqqa would say, "Inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiya," that I dhanantu, here's the word dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiya, was that believer when they said, well, I knew, or dhanantu here, I was in doubt that I was going to meet my fate. That was a mu'min saying it. So for sure he wasn't saying that he was speculating that maybe, that perhaps that can happen. No, this is yaqeen. So for a mu'min, that was yaqeen. Inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiya does not mean speculate, but it means I was sure that was going to be the case. So but for example, inna ba'd al-dhanni ithm, that would mean the speculation. You're doubting something, you're not sure of a certain matter. So just to keep in mind that part. Yadhunnu, speculating, or thinking, with keeping in mind what I had said. Udhnun, you're telling him to doubt, to speculate, to think of something. Dhan is the person that's doubting. Dhan, and it more appears to mean doubt than any other term. So more comes into the Quran to mean speculate or doubt than any other term. So, but just keep in mind what I had said. Dhann is the speculation itself. Dhann is the speculation itself. And now we go for, sorry, about to sneeze. Adda, alhamdulillah, it's not COVID, at least that's what I think. Adda, and adda is to count, but it can also mean to consider. So adda, to count or to consider it many times. I believe we had done a previous word like that. Ya'uddu, to, well, counting or considering. U'dud, count, consider. Ad, the person that's counting or considering. Al-ad is basically the consideration or the count that they did. Gharra, and from it is actually al-gharar in fiqh. That's a major issue. Al-gharra is basically it's a form of delusion, and you're actually giving the person that's seeing this some kind of a positive conclusion, but then the reality of it is otherwise. This is gharra, okay? Gharra ha'ula'i dinahum. That's what they said. It's like, oh, they're just in delusion. Yaghirru, yaghir. Now yaghir, meaning that they would be in delusion. Well, not in delusion, but I would have to think of a word. So that's basically the present tense of this word. Ighrir, I think we already passed our time. So, but I'm just going to go over it really fast. Ghar is basically the person. Ghurur is pride. Why pride? Because why does ghurur come from the word gharra? Because the word ghurur, pride, is you're exaggerating the reality of something. And here you're exaggerating your own ego. So that's why it's called pride. All right? It would be called pride because you're exaggerating your own ego. You're exaggerating who you are. So you have this pride. And remember, and when we said gharra, you're exaggerating the goodness of something, but then the conclusion is totally different. All right? And that's actually the same thing when we actually speak of al-gharar. Al-gharar in fiqh, it's basically that you're exaggerating that this product is actually very good and it's just what that consumer wants, but you're hiding a default in it. You're hiding a default in it, and that would be al-gharar. Same thing, maybe a woman in marriage, she would have all this makeup on and all these different constructed things, so many things are constructed in her body, but she would actually hide the reality of what it really is. Madda, reach out. Reached out. Yamuddu, reaching out. Umdud, reach out. Mad, the person that's reaching out. Mad is basically, how do you say the noun of the verb mad? Mad, the reach out? Can we actually say that? No, we can't say that. Mad, I guess the stretch, maybe? Yeah. Massa actually means to touch, but in the Quran you do see the word massa. Because of the adab in the Quran, you will see the word mass to mean touch, and in some ayat, mass could also mean to be intimate. Mass, to be intimate, meaning sexual relations. And that's why in some of the ayat, in one of the ayat, the madhab Hanafi, they regarded that the ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Al-An'am or Al-Ma'idah, that touching, it was not referring to the actual touching that requires wudu, but it actually refers to sexual relations. Yamassu, and yamassu here, touching. Imsis, actually, it's supposed to be imsis, not imsa. Imsis. Yeah. Anyways, okay. So imsis would actually mean gotta touch. Mass, the person that's touching. Mass is the actual touching. Wadda, meaning to love, to wish, to hope. Wadda, that you would want such a thing to happen. Wadda kathirun minhum, etc. Alright, wadda, they would wish, they would hope, they would want, or wanted, wished. Yawaddu, they're wishing, they're hoping, they would, right now, that would be their dream. Udid would mean, you're asking him to do that. Just wish, hope, etc. Wad, the person that's hoping, wishing, and would, is the actual hope. It's like, oh, I want that. Would. Alright, I would want such a thing to happen. End of today. I know we passed by 10 minutes, but hopefully, inshallah, it was beneficial. We needed to finish at least those boxes that we won't leave it in the middle. Any questions before we end our today's class, inshallah? Nope. Alright. So, assalamu alaikum, everybody, and see you Monday. We're going to continue same time that we did this today, and hopefully we will be able to finish boxes 21 and so forth, because I think it's going to get easier, inshallah, even though, it's grammatically speaking, it's a little more complex, but at least we memorize it. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and jazakumullah khairan for attending.